Hey everyone, welcome back. Grab your tea, get comfortable, because today's story is one of my favorites. It's perfect for practicing your English, and it might just change the way you think about hard work. The title of today's story is Nothing is Free. And here's the one-line lesson before we begin. Everything worth having costs something, but what it costs is usually effort, not money. Let's get into it. In a small town called Rivermill, surrounded by wheat fields and one long dusty road that led to the city, there lived a boy named Daniel. He was 20 years old, tall, with messy black hair and eyes that always seemed to be looking somewhere far away. Daniel had one big dream. He wanted to build his own bakery. Not just any bakery. He wanted to create warm, soft bread and pastries that people would remember for years, the kind of smell that made you stop walking on the street and follow it home. He used to say, "Bread is simple, but it can make people happy. That's not a small thing." Daniel's family was not rich. His father, Thomas, worked at the town's only lumber yard, cutting and stacking wood from early morning until his hands were rough and cracked. His mother, Elena, cleaned houses for wealthier families across town, walking almost 2 miles each way because they couldn't afford a second bicycle. And then there was Daniel's little sister, Mia, only 12 years old, who watched her older brother like he was some kind of hero. Every evening, she would run to the door when he came home and ask, "Did you get closer to your dream today?" Life in the Alvarez house, that was their family name, was simple but hard. Dinner was often just rice, beans, and whatever vegetables were cheap that week. The roof leaked when it rained too hard. Thomas would come home exhausted, barely able to lift his arms, but he always found the energy to ask Daniel about his day. Elena would hum old songs while she cooked, trying to make the small kitchen feel warmer than it was. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and somehow that made the hard days a little easier to carry. One night Daniel couldn't sleep. He climbed onto the roof of their house, like he often did, and looked up at the stars. The sky in Rivermill was clear and full of light, the kind of sky you don't see in big cities. He sat there thinking about his dream, and doubt crept into his mind like a cold wind. "Who am I to think I can start a bakery?" he whispered to himself. "I have no money, no training, nothing." He heard footsteps behind him. It was his father, climbing up carefully to sit beside him. "Can't sleep either?" Thomas asked. "I keep thinking about the bakery," Daniel admitted. "But Dad, I have nothing. No oven, no flour, no shop. It's just a dream in my head." Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking at the stars too. Then he said something Daniel would never forget. "Son, nothing worth having is free. Everything costs something: money, time, sweat, tears. The question is not whether you have enough right now. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price, little by little, every single day." He patted Daniel's shoulder and climbed back down, leaving Daniel alone with those words. The next morning, Daniel walked through town with new eyes. He noticed something he had never paid attention to before. There was no proper bread shop in Rivermill. People bought stale, mass-produced bread from the general store, shipped in from the city, often dry and tasteless by the time it arrived. Farmers, workers, children walking to school, everyone ate this same boring bread every day. Daniel realized this wasn't just a gap. It was an opportunity hiding in plain sight. There was an old man in town named Mr. Whitfield, who used to run a small bakery decades ago before his wife got sick, and he had to close it. The oven still sat in the back of his house, unused, covered in dust. Daniel knew this was his chance. He walked to Mr. Whitfield's house, his heart pounding, and knocked on the door. "What do you want, boy?" Mr. Whitfield asked, opening the door just a crack. He was known in town for being stubborn and short-tempered. "Sir, I want to bake bread, good bread. I know your oven is just sitting there. I don't have money to pay you, but let me use it. Give me 1 week. If it doesn't work, I'll never bother you again." Mr. Whitfield laughed not kindly. "You think baking is easy. You'll waste my flour, waste my time, and give up in 3 days like everyone your age. Then let me prove you wrong," Daniel said, standing straight, not backing down. The old man studied him for a long moment. Something in Daniel's eyes, maybe the same fire he once had, made him sigh and step aside. "1 week, you buy your own flour, you clean up every mess, and if you burn my oven down, you're paying for a new one." Daniel nearly shouted with joy, but managed a simple, grateful, "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." That first week was brutal. Daniel woke up at 4 in the morning, walked 20 minutes to Mr. Whitfield's house in the dark, and started mixing dough with hands that had never done this before. His first batch of bread came out hard as rock. The second batch was undercooked in the middle. He nearly cried with frustration, standing alone in that dusty kitchen at 5 in the morning, flour on his face, doubting everything. But on the third day, something changed. A loaf came out golden brown with a soft, warm inside. Daniel carried it, still warm, to the market and offered a slice to an old woman selling vegetables. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and said, "Oh my, this tastes like my grandmother's bread." That was his first real customer. She bought 2 loaves that day, and word began to spread, slowly, quietly, the way small town news always does. Each morning became the same routine: wake early, walk to the old bakery, bake, walk to the market, sell what he could, walk home exhausted. Some days he sold everything, other days he came home with 3 unsold loaves and a heavy heart. But every single day he learned something new: how much water changes the texture, how the oven's hot spots burn one side faster, how patience matters more than rushing. A few weeks into this routine, a young woman named Sophia, who ran a small coffee stand near the market, approached Daniel with an idea. "Your bread is good, Daniel, really good. But have you thought about pastries, croissants, sweet rolls, things people want with their coffee in the morning? You could sell twice as much." Daniel's eyes lit up with excitement, but just as quickly fear crept in. He had never made pastries before. That was a completely different skill. He went back to Mr. Whitfield that evening. "Sir, could you teach me to make pastries? I know you used to make the best ones in town." Mr. Whitfield's face hardened. "Pastries take years to master, boy. I spent my whole life learning this. Why would I just give it to you for free?" He turned away, clearly protective of the skill he had built his whole identity around. Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he kept coming every single day, cleaning the kitchen spotless, never complaining, always respectful, always early. Weeks passed like this. One evening, as Daniel was scrubbing the oven long after his own baking was done, Mr. Whitfield stood in the doorway watching him. "Why do you keep cleaning like that? You don't have to," the old man said. "Because it's your kitchen, sir. You gave me a chance nobody else would. The least I can do is respect it," Daniel replied simply, not even looking up from his work. Mr. Whitfield was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, almost like it cost him something to say it, he spoke. "Come tomorrow at 3 in the morning. I'll show you how I make croissants, but don't expect me to go easy on you." That began the hardest phase of Daniel's journey. Making pastry dough required folding butter into flour in delicate layers, over and over, keeping everything cold, working quickly but gently. Daniel's first attempts were disasters. The butter melted too fast and leaked out. The dough tore. The croissants came out flat and greasy instead of light and flaky. Mr. Whitfield would shake his head and say things like, "You're rushing again," or "Your hands are too warm, that's why the butter melts." Night after night, Daniel failed. His arms ached from kneading, his eyes burned from lack of sleep. There was one night, after his 15th failed batch, when he sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by ruined dough, and genuinely thought about quitting. "Maybe I'm just not good enough for this," he whispered to himself, tears mixing with the flour on his face. But then his father's words echoed in his mind, "Nothing worth having is free. You pay little by little every single day." He wiped his face, stood back up, and started again. Slowly, painfully slowly, his hands began to understand what his mind already knew. The layers started forming properly. The butter stayed cold longer because his movements became faster and more confident. One morning, after nearly 2 months of failure, Daniel pulled a tray of croissants from the oven, golden, flaky, perfectly puffed. Mr. Whitfield picked one up, broke it open, watched the layers separate like pages of a book, took a bite, and simply nodded. "Now that," he said, "is a croissant." For Daniel, that nod meant more than any trophy ever could. Business began to grow after that. Daniel added croissants, cinnamon rolls, and simple cakes to his small stand. More customers came, and soon his family joined in. Thomas started building small wooden shelves and a proper stand on weekends after his lumber yard shifts. Elena took over managing the money, keeping careful track of every coin earned and spent, since she was better with numbers than Daniel ever was. Little Mia became the unofficial announcer, running around town telling everyone, "My brother makes the best bread in Rivermill, you have to try it." The community started talking. "Have you tried the Alvarez bread? It's better than anything from the city," one farmer said at the market. A school teacher mentioned, "My students ask for that cinnamon roll every single morning now." Rivermill was falling in love with what Daniel had built from almost nothing. Then, just as things were going well, trouble arrived. A large bakery chain opened a branch at the edge of town with bright lights, shiny displays, and prices Daniel simply couldn't compete with. People were curious, drawn in by the newness and the flashy advertising. Within 2 weeks, Daniel's sales dropped by half. He stood at his small stand one afternoon, watching customers walk past him toward the big new shop, and panic settled deep in his chest. "How can I compete with that?" he asked Sophia one evening, his voice shaking with worry. Sophia thought about it and said, "Don't try to compete with their size. Ask your customers what they actually miss." So Daniel did exactly that. He asked the old woman who bought his first loaf. He asked the farmers, the schoolteacher, everyone. Their answers were surprisingly simple. They missed the personal touch, the warmth, the fact that Daniel remembered their names and their favorite orders. They didn't want fancy packaging. They wanted to feel like they mattered. Daniel didn't try to copy the big chain's shiny style. Instead, he leaned into what made his small bakery special. He started greeting every customer by name, wrapping bread in simple brown paper with a small handwritten thank you note, and remembering little details like who liked extra cinnamon or who was baking for a birthday. Slowly, customers began returning, not because his prices were lower, but because his bread tasted like care. One afternoon, an elderly man named Mr. Harrigan, a regular customer who had bought bread from Daniel almost every week, stopped him and said, "You know, son, a lot of young people give up when things get hard, but you didn't. That says more about you than any bread ever could." Those words stayed with Daniel for a long time. By then, the Alvarez family had saved enough to rent a small proper shop in the center of town, with a sign painted by Mia herself that read Alvarez Bakery. Thomas managed deliveries, Elena managed the books, and Daniel finally had his own real kitchen. But life had one more hard lesson waiting. Late one night, Months after the shop opened, a fire broke out in the building next door and spread quickly through the shared wall into the bakery. By morning, half the shop was destroyed, the ovens ruined, shelves burned, months of hard work turned into ash and smoke. Daniel stood outside staring at the wreckage, unable to speak. Some people in town whispered doubts. That family worked so hard, and now it's all gone. Maybe it just wasn't meant to be. Someone murmured near the market. Daniel sat outside the burned shop for hours that day, grief sitting heavy in his chest. But as evening came, he thought of everything he had already survived: the failed dough, the doubt, the competitor, the exhaustion. He stood up, looked at his family, and said firmly, "We are not done. We rebuild." Mia hugged him tightly, and Elena wiped her tears, nodding in agreement. Daniel went to visit Mr. Whitfield, now fully retired, sitting quietly in his garden. He told the old man everything. "Mr. Whitfield listened carefully, then said, "You remember when you first came to me? You had nothing but willingness. That's still true today. The oven is gone, but what you learned isn't. Rebuild with what you have, not what you lost." Word of the fire spread through Rivermill, and something beautiful happened. Neighbors began showing up with donations: old wood for shelves, spare tools, even a second-hand oven someone had in storage. The schoolteacher organized her students to help clean the burned debris on a Saturday morning. Farmers brought extra flour and butter without asking for payment. Sophia set up a small fundraising jar at her coffee stand. Little by little, piece by piece, the town helped rebuild what the fire had taken. Weeks of hard work followed: sanding wood, repainting walls, testing the new second-hand oven late into the night. Finally, the day came for the Alvarez bakery to reopen, bigger and better than before, with a small seating area added and new items on the menu, including a special bread named Rivermill Loaf. In honor of the town that had helped rebuild it, the whole town gathered for the reopening. The mayor, an older woman named Mrs. Coleman, stood up and gave a short speech. "This town has seen many businesses come and go," she said, "but few have shown the kind of spirit this young man and his family have shown. Daniel Alvarez is proof that hard work and community can rebuild anything. He is an inspiration to every young person." In Rivermill, the crowd clapped warmly, and Daniel stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Thank you," he began. "None of this happened because I was special or lucky. It happened because I was willing to work for it, fail at it, and try again. My father once told me that nothing worth having is free. You pay for it with effort, with patience, with never giving up. This bakery is proof of that lesson. Thank you to my family, to Mr. Whitfield, and to every single person in this town who believed in a boy with nothing but flour and a dream." The crowd cheered, and Mia ran up to hug her brother, tears and pride mixing on her face. Before we close today's story, let's go over the takeaways together. Number 1, dreams don't need money to start. They need willingness and the first small step. Number 2, skills worth having take time, failure, and patience to build. There are no shortcuts. Number 3, real growth often comes from listening to people around you, not from copying your competition. Number 4, community and family support can rebuild what disaster destroys if you're willing to ask for help and keep showing up. Number 5, consistency, small daily effort repeated over time, is what actually creates lasting success. So here's the truth I want you to carry with you today. Nothing worth having in this life is free. Not love, not success, not skill. Everything costs something in effort, patience, and heart. But if you're willing to pay that price, one small step at a time, there is nothing you cannot build.